The morning sun cast long shadows across the Valari homeworld as Elder Nira walked through what remained of their capital city. Smoke still rose from the twisted metal structures that once housed millions of her people. The peaceful gardens where children played just weeks ago now lay buried under rubble and ash. The Kethak had come without warning. Their massive ships blotted out the sky before unleashing destruction upon every major city. The Valari had never seen such violence. For thousands of years, their species had lived in harmony, resolving conflicts through discussion and understanding. They had no weapons, no armies, no concept of war beyond ancient stories their elders barely remembered. Now those stories felt like prophecies. Elder Nira called out young Kale as he approached through the ruins. His usual bright blue skin had turned pale with fear and exhaustion. The council is ready to meet, but Elder Tava says we have lost contact with 3 more colonies. Nira closed her eyes and felt the weight of her species' survival pressing down on her shoulders. In just 2 months, the Kethak had destroyed 12 of their outer colonies. Entire families had been taken as slaves. Worlds that had flourished for centuries were now empty, their resources stripped away to feed the Kethak war machine. The emergency council chamber had been hastily set up in an underground facility. The elegant meeting halls above ground were nothing but crater now. As Nira entered, she saw the faces of the few remaining elders. Each one carried the same expression of helpless desperation. "We cannot fight them," Elder Tava said, his voice trembling. "Our people do not know how to fight. We barely understand what fighting means." "The Kethak ships grow stronger each day," added Elder Zahn. "Their weapons turn our cities to dust in minutes. They take our young ones and we never see them again." Nira sat down heavily. The reports from their scouts painted a terrifying picture. The Kethak Empire stretched across dozens of star systems. They had enslaved countless species, treating intelligent beings like tools to be used and discarded. Their entire culture seemed built around conquest and cruelty. "There must be something we can do," whispered Elder Mora. "Someone who might help us." The chamber fell silent. The Valari had always been isolationists, content in their peaceful corner of the galaxy. They knew other species existed but had never sought contact. Now in their darkest hour they faced the possibility that they might be alone in their suffering. "The old archives," Kyle spoke up from the corner where he had been quietly listening. "I have been studying the ancient communication records. There are signals from other worlds, other civilizations." Elder Tava shook his head. "Why would strangers help us? What could we offer them? We have no weapons, no technology they would want. We are a species that grows flowers and writes poetry." "Because," Nira said slowly, an idea forming in her mind, "perhaps there are others who understand that some things are worth protecting, even when they belong to strangers." The next several hours were spent in desperate preparation. The Valari had powerful communication equipment, designed for their peaceful exploration of nearby star systems. Kyle worked with their best technicians to modify the transmitters, boosting their range to reach across the galaxy. The message they crafted was simple but heartbreaking. Elder Nira stood before the recording device, her voice carrying the pain of her entire species. "To any who might hear this transmission, we are the Valari of the Undari system. We are a peaceful people who have never known war. But now, our worlds burn. The Kethak Empire has come to our space. They destroy our cities, enslave our families, and strip our planets bare. We have no weapons to fight them. We have no armies to defend ourselves. We do not even know how to hate our enemies. But we know that what they do is wrong. We know that innocent people should not suffer for the crime of being weak. If there are any among the stars who believe that peace has value, who think that the helpless deserve protection, please hear our cry. We do not ask you to die for us. We only ask that you remember us when we are gone." The signal was broadcast on every frequency their equipment could manage. It spread out from their dying world like ripples in a pond, carrying their plea across the vast emptiness of space. Meanwhile, in a distant solar system, the signal reached Earth. The communication center at Luna Base had been monitoring deep space transmissions for decades. Most of what they received was natural phenomena or automated signals from long-dead civilizations. But this transmission was different. It was alive with emotion and desperation. Lieutenant Roberts was the first to hear it. She called her supervisor immediately. "Commander Blake, you need to hear this. It's a distress call, but not like anything we've ever received." Within hours, the transmission had reached the highest levels of the Terran Defense Command. Admiral Foster sat in his office listening to the Volari plea for the third time. Each time, it hit him like a physical blow. "How far away are they?" he asked his intelligence officer. "Approximately 47 light-years, sir. The Andari system. Our star charts show it's inhabited, but we've never made contact. And this Kethak Empire they mention? Unknown, sir. But if their claims are accurate, we're looking at a significant military force with aggressive expansion policies." "Admiral," Foster stared out the window at Earth's blue oceans. Humanity had spent centuries learning hard lessons about the cost of ignoring aggression. They had seen what happened when good people did nothing while bullies grew stronger. "Assemble the council," he ordered, "and start preparing fleet readiness reports. I want to know everything we can about the Andari system within 12 hours. The emergency session convened that evening. Representatives from every Earth nation sat around the massive table, listening as the Volari message played once more. The room was completely silent when it ended. "They're asking for help," said General Martinez. "But they're not offering us anything in return. No trade agreements, no territorial concessions, no strategic advantages." "That's exactly why we should help them," replied Admiral Foster. "They're not politicians making deals. They're people facing extinction." The debate continued for hours. Some argued that Earth had no business interfering in alien conflicts. Others worried about the military cost of confronting an unknown enemy across interstellar distances, but gradually a consensus emerged. Captain Miller was called to the council chamber near midnight. He stood at attention as Admiral Foster briefed him on the situation. "You'll be leading the expeditionary force, Captain. Initial reconnaissance and first contact protocols. Find out exactly what we're dealing with and report back." "What are our rules of engagement, sir?" Admiral Foster looked at the faces around the table, then back at Miller. "Standard protocols for now. But Captain, understand this. If even half of what that message describes is true, we're not just looking at a rescue mission. We're looking at a war. The wheels of human military might begin to turn. Across Earth and its colonies, ships were prepared, crews were briefed, and weapons were checked. The Volari had cried out in their darkest hour, not knowing if anyone would hear. They were about to discover that their call had reached the one species in the galaxy that considered the protection of innocence a sacred duty. Captain Miller stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Andari system. What they found made even the hardened military officers gasp in shock. 3 planets that should have been glowing with city lights were nothing but dark, smoking ruins. Debris fields filled the space between worlds, the remains of orbital stations and civilian ships that had tried to flee. The beautiful blue-green world that had been the Volari homeworld was still burning in several places. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Torres from her position at the communication station. "The entire system looks like a graveyard." "Are we detecting any life signs?" Miller asked. "Scanning now, sir," replied Commander Blake. "I'm reading scattered settlements on the surface of the homeworld. Looks like some underground facilities are still active, but the outer colonies are completely silent." Miller watched the tactical display as his ships moved deeper into the system. The destruction was systematic and thorough. This was not the result of a quick battle. This was the work of an enemy that took pleasure in causing maximum suffering. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," Torres announced. "It's weak, but it's definitely coming from the Volari. Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was tired and filled with pain, but also carried a note of desperate hope. "Unknown ships, this is Elder Nira of the Volari Council. Please identify yourselves. Are you friend or enemy?" Miller stepped forward. "Elder Nira, this is Captain Miller of the human fleet. We received your distress call. We've come to help." There was a long silence. Then the sound of weeping could be heard over the communication channel. "Humans, you came? You actually came?" "Yes, we came. We're going to land a diplomatic team to meet with you. Can you provide us with safe coordinates? The old spaceport in Sector 7 is still intact. We will meet you there. Miller turned to Commander Blake. Take a full diplomatic team down to the surface. I want to know everything about what happened here and what we're up against. The landing shuttle touched down on cracked pavement. Commander Blake led a team of 6 humans out into the alien world. The air smelled of smoke and death. Buildings that had once been works of art were now broken shells. But despite the destruction, Blake could see that this had been a beautiful world. A group of Valari approached from the ruins of what had once been a terminal building. They were tall, slender beings with pale blue skin and large, expressive eyes. Elder Nira was easy to identify. She carried herself with dignity despite the exhaustion that showed in every line of her body. Commander Blake, she said, somehow, knowing his rank without being told. Thank you for coming. I did not think anyone would answer our call. We heard your message, Elder Nira. It reached us across 47 light-years of space. Tell us what happened here. They walked through the ruined city as Nira explained. The Kethek had arrived 6 months ago with a massive fleet. They had demanded complete surrender and the enslavement of the entire Valari population. When the peaceful aliens had tried to negotiate, the Kethek had begun systematic bombardment of every major city. They do not just want our resources, Nira explained, as they passed a memorial where hundreds of names were carved into black stone. They want us to suffer. They broadcast videos of our captured people being tortured. They destroyed our art galleries and libraries first, before even touching our industrial centers. They want to break our spirits. Dr. Hayes, the team's xenobiologist, asked quietly, "How many of your people survived?" "Of 12 billion Valari, perhaps 2 million remain. Most are in hiding in underground shelters. The Kethek have taken nearly 1 million as slaves to work in their mines and factories." Commander Blake felt a cold anger building in his chest. "Tell us about the Kethek. What kind of species are they?" Elder Nira led them to an underground chamber where other Valari had gathered. They looked at the humans with a mixture of hope and fear. Many bore scars from Kethek weapons. "The Kethek are a warrior culture," explained Elder Tava, another surviving council member. "They believe that the strong have the right to dominate the weak. Their entire society is built on conquest and slavery. They have enslaved dozens of species across the galaxy. We recovered some of their communication signals," added a younger Valari named Kale. "They consider mercy to be a disease. They teach their children that compassion makes you weak. They cannot understand why anyone would help strangers without expecting something in return." Blake exchanged glances with his team members. Lieutenant Torres leaned forward. "Do they have any weaknesses? Any species that have successfully fought them?" "No," Nira said sadly. "Every species they have encountered either surrendered immediately or was crushed within months. They have superior technology and vast numbers. Most importantly, they enjoy causing pain. We have seen their interrogation methods. They do not just want information, they want their victims to break." Dr. Hayes was reviewing data on his tablet. "Elder Nira, you said they took 1 million of your people as slaves. Where are they being held?" "Scattered across the Kethek Empire. Some work in the mining colonies in the outer systems. Others are held in processing facilities where they are broken down mentally before being sold to other Kethek worlds. The worst are taken to their homeworld as entertainment for their ruling class." The chamber fell silent as the humans absorbed this information. Blake could see the rage building in his team's faces. Humanity had its own dark history with slavery and oppression. They knew exactly what the Valari were describing. "Commander," Torres said quietly, "we need to get this information back to the fleet immediately." Blake nodded, then turned back to Nira. "Elder, we're going to help you, but I need you to understand that this might get worse before it gets better. If we move against the Kethek, they may retaliate against your remaining people." Nira's eyes filled with determination. "Commander Blake, my people are already dying. Every day more of us disappear. If there is a chance to save even some of our children, we will take that risk." The human team spent several more hours gathering intelligence. They learned about Kethak's ship designs, their military tactics, and their territorial holdings. The picture that emerged was of an empire that controlled dozens of star systems through fear and brutality. When they returned to the fleet, Blake immediately contacted Captain Miller. "Sir, it's worse than we thought. The Kethak aren't just conquerors, they're systematic genocidal slavers, and they have resources that might match our own." Miller listened to the full briefing in grim silence. When Blake finished, he asked, "What's your assessment, Commander?" "Sir, if we're going to do this, we need to do it completely. Half measures won't work against an enemy like this. They'll just retaliate against every innocent they can reach." Miller stared out at the burning Valari homeworld. "Send a full report. Back to Earth. Priority Alpha encryption. Tell Admiral Foster that we're not looking at a rescue mission anymore. We're looking at a war of liberation." As the communication beam raced back toward Earth, carrying news of the Kethak Empire's atrocities, Captain Miller began planning. The humans had come to help one peaceful species. Now they were discovering that the galaxy contained an evil that threatened countless innocent lives. The Kethak Empire had built their power on the assumption that mercy was weakness and that no species would fight for strangers. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral Foster sat in the secure briefing room deep beneath Luna Base, reading the reports from Captain Miller's fleet for the 4th time. Each page made his jaw clench tighter. General Parker and Colonel Davis sat across from him, their faces showing the same grim anger. 43 species, Foster said quietly. 43 different intelligent races enslaved by these Kethak monsters. The intelligence reports painted a picture of systematic horror that spanned half the galaxy. The Kethak Empire had been expanding for over 2 centuries, conquering every peaceful civilization they encountered. They had turned slavery into an art form, breaking down entire species until they became nothing more than tools. "Look at this," General Parker said, pointing to a data file. "The Zephyrians had a population of 8 billion. The Kethak enslaved them 50 years ago. Now their homeworld has less than 1 million survivors working in mining camps. The rest were worked to death or sold to other Kethak worlds." Colonel Davis opened another file. "The Gentle Ones of Meridia, 3 billion pacifists who had never known violence. The Kethak turned their children into gladiators for entertainment, made parents watch their own kids fight to the death." Foster stood up and walked to the large display screen showing a map of known space. Red dots marked Kethak territory. It was massive, stretching across dozens of star systems. "They're not just conquering for resources," he said. "They enjoy the suffering. It's part of their culture." Major Thompson entered the briefing room carrying a thick stack of files. "Sir, we've finished analyzing the Kethak military structure. Their fleet numbers are comparable to our own, but their tactics are brutally effective." "Show me," Foster ordered. Thompson activated the holographic display. They use a 3-phase conquest strategy. First, they send scout ships to identify the target species' weaknesses. Then they launch overwhelming attacks against civilian targets to break morale. Finally, they land ground forces for systematic enslavement operations. "What makes them so effective?" asked Parker. "Fear, sir. They deliberately commit atrocities to terrorize other species into surrender. Most civilizations give up after seeing what happens to those who resist. The Kethak have never encountered a species that fights harder when witnessing injustice." Foster studied the tactical analysis. The Kethak had superior numbers in some areas, but their strategy relied on their enemies being afraid. They were used to fighting species who valued individual survival over collective justice. "They've made one critical error," Foster realized. "They assume all species think like them. They believe everyone puts self-interest first." Captain Anderson entered the room with another officer. "Admiral, this is Dr. Hayes, our xenobiologist. He just returned from the Valari homeworld with some disturbing findings." Dr. Hayes looked exhausted but determined. "Sir, I interviewed over 200 Valari survivors. The Kethak torture methods are designed to break the spirit, not just gather information. They have mobile processing centers where they systematically destroy the personalities of captured beings." "Explain," Foster said. "They use a combination of physical pain, psychological manipulation, and neural conditioning to turn free-thinking individuals into obedient slaves. The process takes approximately 6 months. After that, the victims cannot even remember what freedom felt like. The room fell silent. Every human officer present understood the implications. This was not just conquest. It was the systematic destruction of consciousness itself. Colonel Davis spoke first. "Admiral, we're looking at industrialized evil. This is what our ancestors fought against in the darkest chapters of human history, but on a galactic scale." Foster nodded grimly. "And they've been getting away with it because no one has ever fought back effectively. Every species they've encountered either surrendered immediately or was crushed before they could organize resistance." Major Thompson brought up another display. "Sir, intelligence suggests the Kethak leadership views mercy as a mental illness. Their military manuals actually contain sections on how to exploit the weakness of species that show compassion for non-family members." "They can't understand altruism," Dr. Hayes added. "When the Valari tried to negotiate for the safety of their children, the Kethak interpreted it as a bargaining strategy. They couldn't comprehend that the Valari genuinely cared about beings they weren't related to." Admiral Foster walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. The weight of the decision before him was enormous. Earth could choose to rescue the Valari and withdraw, minimizing their own risk. Or they could choose to confront an empire that had been built on suffering. "General Parker, what's our current fleet strength?" "We have 12 carrier groups, 47 destroyer squadrons, and approximately 200 support vessels. Our Marine Corps numbers 800,000 active personnel. We also have the Colonial Defense Forces, adding another 1,000,000 troops." "Against how many Kethak?" "Intelligence estimates suggest roughly equal numbers, sir. But they have the advantage of established supply lines and fortified positions throughout their territory." Foster stood again and looked at each officer in turn. "Gentlemen, I want your honest assessments. If we commit to full military action against the Kethak Empire, what are our chances?" Colonel Davis answered first. "From a purely tactical standpoint, it's winnable but costly. We'd be fighting across multiple star systems against an entrenched enemy. The bigger question," General Parker added, "is whether we're prepared for the casualties. This won't be a quick victory. It could take years." Major Thompson looked uncomfortable. "Sir, there's something else to consider. Our intelligence suggests that if the Kethak realize they're losing, they might execute all their slaves rather than let them be freed. We could be looking at the deaths of billions of innocents." The room fell silent again. Foster knew that this was the moment that would define not just his career, but humanity's place in the galaxy. "Dr. Hayes," he said finally, "in your professional opinion, is there any possibility of negotiating with the Kethak? Any chance of a diplomatic solution?" Hayes shook his head. "None, sir. Their entire identity is built around domination. They view negotiations as something only weak species do. To them, the very act of talking instead of fighting proves that we're inferior. And if we do nothing, the Valari will be extinct within 6 months. After that, the Kethak will probably expand into new territory. Based on their expansion patterns, they're likely to encounter other peaceful species. This cycle will continue until someone stops them." Foster made his decision. "Gentlemen, prepare a full strategic assessment for the Terran Council. I want mobilization plans for total war against the Kethak Empire." "Sir," General Parker said carefully, "the Council will ask why we're risking human lives for aliens we've never met." Foster looked at the star map again, at all those red dots representing enslaved worlds. "Because, General, this is who we are. Humanity has always had a choice between standing up to bullies or enabling them. We've learned from our own history. What happens when good people do nothing?" He turned to face the room. "The Kethak Empire exists because they've never encountered a species willing to fight for strangers. They've built their power on the assumption that intelligent beings only care about themselves and their immediate families." Colonel Davis nodded slowly. "They're about to learn that humans are different." "Very different," Foster agreed. "Begin. Preparations immediately. And Colonel, I want psychological warfare specialists briefing our commanders. The Kethak think they understand how fear works. It's time to show them what real terror looks like. As the officers filed out to begin their preparations, Foster remained alone with the intelligence reports. Somewhere out there, millions of beings were suffering in Kethak slave camps, believing they had been forgotten by the universe. They were about to discover that their cries for help had reached the one species that considered the protection of innocence worth any sacrifice. The first strike came at dawn across 12 different star systems simultaneously. Admiral Foster had spent 3 months planning the largest military operation in human history. Now, as he watched the tactical displays from the command center, on Luna Base, years of preparation were about to be tested against an enemy that had never known defeat. Operation Freedom's Thunder is now active, announced General Parker. All fleet groups report ready status. Captain Wilson led the assault on the Kethak slave processing facility in the Rigel system. His Marines had trained for months on ship-to-ship combat, but nothing had prepared them for what they found when they boarded the massive Kethak prison ship. The corridors reeked of fear and suffering. Cells packed with beings from dozens of different species lined every wall. Some prisoners were so broken they could barely lift their heads when the Marine squads passed. Others pressed against the energy barriers, hope flickering in their eyes, for the first time in years. "Command, this is Wilson," he reported over the comm. "We've secured Deck 7. Estimate 2,000 prisoners on this level alone. Many need immediate medical attention." "Copy that, Wilson. Medical teams are standing by." Sergeant Walsh kicked open the door to what appeared to be a control room. Inside, a group of Kethak officers was frantically trying to destroy computer records. They were tall, gray-skinned beings with multiple arms and cold black eyes. When they saw the humans, they reached for their weapons. The firefight was brief and one-sided. Human military training proved superior to Kethak arrogance. Within minutes, Walsh had secured the control systems and begun downloading the facility's prisoner records. "Sir, you need to see this," called out Corporal Martinez from another terminal. "They've got a complete database of every species they've enslaved. Population numbers, breeding programs, work assignments. They treat intelligent beings like livestock." Wilson felt his jaw clench as he reviewed the data. The Kethak had been categorizing conquered species by physical capabilities and psychological weaknesses. Children were separated from parents and trained as gladiators. Adults were broken down in systematic torture programs before being sold to the highest bidder. Meanwhile, in the Centauri system, Commander Price was leading an orbital bombardment of Kethak military installations. Her destroyer squadron had caught the enemy completely off guard. Kethak commanders had grown used to fighting species that announced their intentions and tried to minimize casualties. "Target the command centers first," Price ordered. "Leave the slave barracks intact." The human warships moved with deadly precision. Unlike their previous enemies, the humans showed no mercy to military targets while carefully avoiding civilian areas. Kethak defense stations exploded in brilliant flashes as human torpedoes found their marks. "Commander, we're receiving panicked communications from the surface," reported Lieutenant Morgan. "The Kethak can't understand our tactics. They keep asking why we're not targeting the slave populations." "Because we're not monsters," Price replied coldly. "Continue the bombardment. I want every Kethak military facility in this system reduced to rubble." On the planet's surface, Major Thompson led the first wave of human ground forces. The Kethak had built their bases around slave labor camps, using the prisoners as human shields. Previous enemies had been forced to choose between military objectives and innocent lives. The humans chose a third option. "Alpha Team, secure the eastern approach. Bravo Team, begin evacuation of the mining complex. Charlie Team, prepare for urban combat in the administrative district." Thompson's forces moved like a precision instrument. They had studied Kethak base layouts for months, identifying every weakness in their defensive strategy. While one team rescued prisoners, another struck at military targets with surgical precision. The Kethak defenders found themselves facing an enemy unlike any in their experience. Human soldiers fought harder when they saw evidence of atrocities. Instead of being demoralized by the suffering around them, they became more determined to win. "Major, we've secured the main compound," reported Captain Evans over the comm. 237 prisoners freed. Most are in rough shape, but they're alive. Any resistance? Minimal, sir. The Kethak seemed confused by our rescue. Priorities. Their defensive positions were designed to force attackers to choose between military objectives and prisoner safety. When we did both simultaneously, their strategy fell apart. Back on Luna Base, Admiral Foster monitored reports from all 12 simultaneous operations. The results exceeded his most optimistic projections. Human forces had freed over 15,000 prisoners in the first day alone, while crippling Kethak military capabilities across multiple systems. Admiral, we're receiving communications from the Kethak High Command, announced Colonel Davis. They're demanding to speak with our leadership. Put them through. The holographic display showed a massive Kethak general, his multiple arms gesturing angrily. When he spoke, the translation software rendered his words in cold, precise English. And War Master Brack of the Kethak Empire, you will cease this unprovoked aggression immediately and withdraw from our territory. Foster stepped forward. War Master Brack, I am Admiral Foster of the Human Defense Forces. Your empire is built on slavery and genocide. We're here to end it. Brack's black eyes widened in confusion. You risk your own species for creatures that mean nothing to you. This makes no sense. What do you gain from this madness? We gain a galaxy where children don't grow up in chains, Foster replied. Where intelligent beings aren't tortured for entertainment. Where peace means something more than temporary exhaustion between conquests. You speak of concepts that have no value, Brack snarled. Mercy is weakness. Compassion is disease. Only strength matters. Then you understand nothing about strength, Foster said quietly. Real strength is using your power to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Everything else is just bullying. The transmission ended abruptly. Within hours, Kethak reinforcements began moving toward the human assault zones. But they found themselves facing an enemy that fought with a combination of tactical brilliance and moral fury they had never encountered. Lieutenant Commander Reed intercepted Kethak communications as their forces tried to coordinate a response. The aliens were struggling to understand human motivations. Their military doctrine had no provisions for fighting an enemy that became stronger when witnessing injustice. They're calling us the madness, Reed reported to his superiors. They think we're suffering from some kind of mental disorder that makes us care about strangers. General Stone, leading the ground assault on a major Kethak stronghold, smiled grimly at the report. Let them think we're mad. Mad enough to cross the galaxy for people we've never met. Mad enough to risk everything for beings who can't fight back. His forces had just liberated a re-education facility where captured beings were systematically brainwashed. The rescued prisoners could barely comprehend that someone had come to save them without expecting payment or service in return. The Kethak Empire, built on centuries of conquest and cruelty, was discovering that their greatest strength had become their fatal weakness. They had created a galaxy where every species feared them, but also where every species would welcome their destroyers as liberators. Human forces pressed deeper into Kethak territory, each victory revealing new horrors and strengthening their resolve. The aliens had spent generations perfecting the art of breaking spirits. They were about to learn what happened when they encountered spirits that refused to break. 6 months after the first human strike, the last Kethak stronghold fell in a blaze of defeated arrogance. War Master Brack's fortress world had been considered impregnable for over a century. It took Captain Evans and his combined force of humans and liberated aliens exactly 14 hours to reduce it to rubble. Admiral Foster stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the final Kethak surrender. Around him, displays showed liberation celebrations across dozens of star systems. Species that had been enslaved for generations were tasting freedom for the first time in living memory. Admiral, we're receiving surrender offers from the last 3 Kethak fleet commanders, reported Commander Price. They're requesting terms. Terms? Foster almost laughed. Tell them the only term is unconditional surrender. Every slave freed, every prison camp opened, every war criminal turned over for judgment by their victims. The Kethak Empire had crumbled faster than anyone expected. Their military strategy had been built on fighting enemies who feared casualties more than they valued justice. When faced with humans who fought harder as the atrocities became clearer, their entire tactical doctrine collapsed. More importantly, the enslaved populations had risen up once they realized salvation was possible. Billions of beings who had forgotten what hope felt like suddenly remembered how to fight for their freedom. On the liberated world of Meridia, Elder Tava walked through gardens that were blooming again for the first time in 50 years. The gentle ones were slowly rebuilding their peaceful civilization, but now they had human advisors teaching them defensive strategies. "I still do not understand," Tava said to Sergeant Walsh, who was helping establish a planetary defense grid. "Your people traveled across the galaxy to save strangers. You lost thousands of your own soldiers for beings you had never met. Why?" Walsh paused in his work, looking out at the Meridian children playing in fields that had once been prison camps. "Because that's what good people do, Elder. When you see someone being hurt and you have the power to stop it, you stop it. Everything else is just excuses." Similar conversations were happening across the former Kethek Empire. Ambassador Clark was working with representatives from 43 liberated species to establish the Galactic Defense Alliance. The charter was simple. Never again would slavery and genocide go unchallenged among the stars. The Valari homeworld had become the unofficial capital of this new alliance. Elder Nira, once a leader of a dying people, now coordinated relief efforts for billions of refugees. Human engineering teams worked alongside Valari artists to rebuild cities that combined defensive necessity with beauty. "The humans have taught us something we never knew," Nira explained to a gathering of liberated species leaders. "Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is what you get when good people are willing to fight for it." Young Kale, who had helped send the original distress signal, was now studying at the Human Military Academy on Earth. He was part of the first class of alien officers being trained in human tactical doctrine, not for conquest, but for the protection of the innocent. "The strangest thing about humans," Kale wrote in his journal, "is that they consider protecting strangers to be normal. They cannot understand species who only care about their own families. To them, every intelligent being deserves protection simply because they exist." General Stone was overseeing the establishment of monitoring stations throughout former Kethek space, early warning systems that would detect any attempt to rebuild the empire of slavery. Human ships patrolled trade routes, ensuring that the freed species could rebuild without fear. The Kethek themselves were learning hard lessons about justice. War Master Brack sat in a cell on the prison world of judgment waiting for his trial. Representatives from every species he had tormented would serve as his judges. He would face the consequences of his actions, but he would face them according to civilized law, not Kethak brutality. "The humans even show mercy to their enemies," one of his former subordinates had said during his own trial. "They could have executed us all, but instead they gave us trials. They try to make us understand why we were wrong." Dr. Hayes was documenting the recovery process of formerly enslaved populations. The psychological damage would take generations to heal, but healing was happening. Children who had been born in captivity were learning what it meant to choose their own paths in life. "The most remarkable thing," he reported to the Terran Council, "is how quickly the freed populations adapted to the concept of altruism. Once they saw humans risking their lives for strangers, they began helping each other across species lines. The Kethak never understood that compassion is contagious." Lieutenant Torres, now a captain, was establishing communication networks that connected every liberated world. No planet would ever again face extinction alone. If one world called for help, dozens would respond. Major Thompson had been promoted to general and was training multi-species defense forces. Former slaves were learning to become protectors. The weak were becoming strong, not through conquest but through cooperation. The Kethak made one fundamental error, Thompson explained to his mixed species officer corps. They assumed that strength and cruelty were the same thing, but real strength comes from using your power to lift others up, not tear them down. Captain Miller, the first human to see the devastation of the Valari homeworld, now commanded the flagship of the joint species fleet. His crew included beings from a dozen different worlds, all working together to maintain the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. "The galaxy is different now," he said during a memorial service for the human soldiers who had died in the Liberation War. "It's a place where children can grow up without fear, where different species work together instead of conquering each other. That's what our people died for. That's why their sacrifice mattered." On Earth, in the halls of the Terran Defense Command, a new motto had been inscribed above the main entrance: "The strongest among us protect the weakest among us." It served as a reminder of humanity's role in the galaxy. The former Kethak Empire had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a confederation of free worlds working together for mutual protection and prosperity. Trade flourished between species that had never known peace. Science advanced as different minds shared knowledge instead of hoarding it. Elder Nira stood once again in the gardens of the Valari capital, but now she was not alone. Representatives from dozens of species worked together in the afternoon sun, planning new colonies and trade agreements. Children from different worlds played together, learning each other's languages and customs. "You know," she said to Ambassador Clark, who was visiting to finalize the latest defense agreements, "when we sent that first message into space, we hoped someone might remember us after we were gone. We never imagined anyone would risk everything to save us." Clark smiled, watching human and alien children playing together. "That's the difference between hoping someone will remember you and knowing that someone will fight for you." The galaxy learned that there are people willing to cross any distance and pay any price to make sure that innocents are protected. The Kethak Empire was gone, but its fall had created something far more valuable than another empire. It had created a community of worlds bound together not by fear or conquest, but by the shared understanding that the strong have a duty to protect the weak. The stars themselves seemed brighter now, filled with the light of freedom instead of the darkness of oppression. And somewhere in the depths of space, other civilizations were learning the most important lesson the galaxy had ever been taught. When evil rises, heroes will answer the call.